Have you ever been told you're not good enough, only to find out the reason they rejected you had nothing to do with your talent and everything to do with something buried deep in your past? That's exactly what happened to Carla Ruiz, a woman whose dream of becoming a pilot was shattered until a scar on her collarbone forced open a secure channel that would unravel everything. What started as a rejection ended in classified files, a sealed identity, and the kind of vindication you only read about in novels. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Carla Ruiz had always known she wasn't built like everyone else. Born in a small coastal village in northern Chile, raised among fishermen and mechanics, she spent her childhood looking up, not at the stars like poets or dreamers, but at the streaks of jet trails across the sky, trailing behind planes she could only imagine being in. She had a habit of naming each plane she saw based on the sound of its engine, and by age 12, she could identify most commercial and military aircraft just by the tremor they left in the air. Her father, a stern mechanic with oil-stained fingers and a quiet pride in precision, often reminded her that machines didn't care about dreams. "They care about skill," he'd say, wiping his hands with a rag as he handed her a rusted bolt to fit back into place. She'd grown up with the smell of engine grease and burnt rubber, not dollhouses or picture books. While other girls braided hair and whispered secrets, Carla took apart carburetors and rewired radio transmitters. Despite a life of modest means and limited opportunities, Carla carved a path for herself. She applied for the South American Aerospace Cadet Program, the continent's most competitive training ground for future pilots, navigators, and defense engineers. It was rigorous, highly selective, and unapologetically elitist. Most of its candidates came from high-ranking families, diplomatic lines, or elite military circles. Carla had none of that. But what she did have was raw skill. Her aptitude test scores broke regional records. Her mechanical engineering exam left one of the instructors quietly whispering to another, "We've never seen anyone reverse calibrate that model without a visual guide." Still, the day she walked into the glass-paneled admission center wearing her second-hand slacks and a borrowed blazer, something shifted. The moment her ID was scanned, the woman behind the desk stiffened. Her name lit up the screen in red for half a second, too quick for the untrained eye to notice, but Carla saw it, and so did the guards. They gave her the usual tight-lipped instructions. Her biometric scan went off without explanation, and within an hour she was informed, curtly and without room for appeal, that her application had been declined. "Not due to performance," the officer said, avoiding eye contact, "but due to procedural flags." Flags. The word echoed in her mind like an unexplained illness. What procedural flag could override a perfect exam performance, an impeccable physical condition? Stunned, humiliated, and half ashamed to return to her town empty-handed, Carla went back to the only place that ever made sense, her father's broken workshop tucked between a boatyard and a concrete warehouse. She didn't tell anyone what had happened, not even her closest friend Martina, who had stayed up late helping her rehearse for her panel interview. For a few days she just wandered, sat by the shore, picked up odd repair jobs on old motorcycles and shortwave radios. Then came the thunderstorm. A brutal, wet July evening and a lightning surge shorted out power in several coastal neighborhoods. Carla had been helping repair a naval antenna site as a volunteer, just to keep herself busy. One of the relay towers had blown out, and she reached up instinctively to adjust a snapped cable when her collar slid aside, exposing the pale, jagged scar on her collarbone, one she'd always dismissed as a childhood accident. She didn't even know how she got it. Her earliest memory was of being pulled out of a wreckage. Flashing lights, someone shouting in a language she didn't know, the heat of metal, and then nothing until her father appeared beside her hospital bed. He'd never explained what happened, only muttered something about an accident when she was very young. But that night, when a communications officer saw the scar under the tower's flickering lights, everything stopped. He stared at her like he'd seen a ghost, asked her to stay put, radioed someone on a frequency she couldn't hear. Within the hour, 2 men in naval uniforms arrived, not local, not Chilean. They scanned her, asked for her ID again, and when they saw her name, they spoke in hushed tones and escorted her away from the antenna site, not under arrest, not with hostility, but with urgency. In the back of their unmarked vehicle, one of them asked, "Did your father ever mention Project Vega?" She shook her head. He leaned back, exchanging a glance with the other officer. Then, it's time someone did. And that's when everything began to unravel. Calla Ruiz had always moved through life like someone trying not to take up too much space, but not because she lacked presence. She was tall for a woman, with lean limbs strengthened from years of hoisting engines, climbing scaffolds, and hauling equipment up steep inclines. Her hair, thick and coal black, was always pulled back into a practical twist or tight braid. Her skin bore the bronze tone of the southern sun, freckled faintly at the bridge of her nose from long hours outdoors. Her eyes, though, those were the contradiction. Cool, steel-gray irises that held more silence than fire, like overcast skies before a downpour. When people looked into her eyes, they saw control. What they rarely saw was the reservoir of grief and stubborn hope that had shaped her from the inside out. She had grown up on the outskirts of Puerto Cabana, a fishing town that barely made it onto national maps. Her childhood was a patchwork of rusted tools, whirring engines, and half-completed repairs on boats and vehicles too worn to be called functional. Her father, Tomas Ruiz, had taken her in when she was just 5, introducing her to the world not with bedtime stories, but with the rhythm of socket wrenches and gear oil. He taught her to problem-solve by watching, taught her discipline by example, and taught her silence by never quite answering the question she asked about where she came from. Her last name was his. Her story, however, was never fully hers. Every morning in Puerto Cabana started with the call of gulls and the clank of chains from anchored ships. While other kids dragged themselves to school in uniforms 2 sizes too big, Calla was already elbow-deep in grease, fixing small motors, or helping her father patch hulls. She did go to school, reluctantly, dutifully, but her real education was always in the shadows of their family workshop. Her teachers found her sharp, quick, but distant. She never joined in group activities, never stayed behind for clubs, always kept her head down unless asked to solve a mechanical or mathematical challenge. It was as though she knew her time in that system was borrowed, a necessary layover, before she could break through to whatever it was she truly believed she was meant for. By the time she turned 18, Calla had acquired a reputation across 3 neighboring towns as the girl who fixes things others throw away. She rebuilt old radio sets, reprogrammed defunct drones from a scrapped military outpost, even rigged a boat's steering system from salvaged drone servos and a motorcycle throttle. People paid her in cash when they could, in bread and fish when they couldn't. She never minded. In her mind, she was building credit, not just with people, but with the universe. If she fixed enough, helped enough, stayed good long enough, maybe the world would finally acknowledge that she belonged in the skies. It was that quiet, tireless pursuit that led her to apply for the South American Aerospace Cadet Program. She had watched the recruitment posters appear year after year at government offices and schools. Sleek jets, poised cadets, the promise of flight and national pride. But this time the requirements had shifted. They had opened a new evaluation route, one that allowed independent applicants to compete, so long as they passed every phase of screening without a single red flag. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and Calla threw herself into preparation with the intensity of someone who had waited a decade for a door to open a single inch. Her study schedule began at 5 a.m. She balanced part-time repair work with intensive self-guided training in mathematics, physics, flight theory, and geopolitics. Martina, her closest friend since childhood and a clerk at the local naval station, helped her access old training manuals and declassified simulation footage. They often studied together in the dusty corner of the workshop, surrounded by engines and toolboxes, pages of scribbled calculations pinned between spark plugs and soldering guns. Calla's physical training was even more extreme. She constructed obstacle courses using wooden pallets and rusted scaffolds, trained with ankle weights along the coastline, and memorized pilot breathing techniques to simulate altitude conditioning. She even taught herself Morse code, just in case. By the time the entrance exams arrived, she had nothing left to give, but she didn't need anything more. She passed every test. She beat seasoned applicants from military families. Her performance in the flight simulation module left even the evaluators momentarily stunned. She didn't just know how to fly. She understood the machine, its rhythm, its breathing. She flew it like someone playing a beloved instrument. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yet despite it all, she had walked into that admission center only to be turned away like a stranger knocking at the wrong door. The rejection hadn't broken her in the way people expected. She didn't cry in public, didn't throw things or demand answers. Instead, she returned home and went silent. Not out of shame, but confusion. Kala had been denied opportunities before because of money, connections, or lack of pedigree. But this had felt different. They weren't just uninterested, they had been afraid. She thought about that moment often in the days that followed. The flicker of red on the admissions clerk's screen, the way the biometric scanner had stalled for 3 seconds too long, the way no one looked her in the eye when they handed her the rejection slip. She wanted to scream but didn't. Instead, she kept fixing things. Fixing was her anchor, her method of regaining control. When your world cracks open for no clear reason, the only thing left to do is repair what you can reach. But beneath her controlled exterior, questions brewed like storms. What could possibly be in her record that caused a military-grade rejection on sight? Why had her father never told her anything about her past? And why, in the most inexplicable moments, especially around high-tech military equipment, did her body sometimes trigger reactions that couldn't be explained? It would take the flicker of a scar, one forgotten since childhood, to set everything in motion. But Kala didn't know that yet. For now, all she knew was rejection, and the haunting sense that something about her was never meant to be ordinary. Porto Kavanagh wasn't the kind of town where people expected anything monumental to happen. Perched between rugged cliffs and the ever-churning sea, it was more a resting point than a destination. Faded murals of saints and revolutionaries flaked from stucco walls, while corrugated rooftops rattled in the ocean winds like coins in a jar. The streets, narrow and winding, were etched with the residue of salt and time. Everything seemed in a constant state of erosion: walls, boats, memory. But within this quiet, persistent decay, life continued, held together by stubborn hands and salt-weathered souls who knew how to endure. The town's economy limped along, dependent on the ebb and flow of fish harvests and the seasonal visits from trade barges. It had one dock, one church, 2 cantinas, and a school with patched-up windows that only taught up to the 10th grade. Most of the young men left by 17 to work on trawlers or in construction camps farther inland. The women either followed, stayed to raise siblings, or took on roles at the market stalls and the tiny health outpost near the highway. Dreams, in Porto Kavanagh, were a quiet luxury, something you didn't speak of loudly in case they shattered before you finished the sentence. Despite this, the town held a certain rhythm that rooted itself in those who lived there. Mornings began with the clamor of chains as the fishing boats were prepped for the day. Dogs wandered the alleys freely, respected more for their loyalty than their breed. Children played in the dust with broken toys that had been repaired so many times they were more wire than plastic. There was a shared acceptance of scarcity. Gasoline was rationed, power outages were common, and running water was considered a blessing more than a right. And yet, in that scarcity, people developed a tenacious generosity. No one went without bread if someone else had it. No one stayed out in the rain if there was space under a neighbor's roof. You learned to make do. You learned to be grateful for less. It was in this backdrop that Kala Ruiz was formed, layer by layer. Her father's workshop sat just off the dock road, a low concrete structure half swallowed by creeping vines and rusted metal parts. It was part garage, part scrapyard, part sanctuary. A place where the sea wind carried the smell of fuel and solder, where radios hummed with unfinished symphonies of static, and where every inch of the space was filled with something that didn't quite work yet, but might if you understood it. Inside, the floor was always scattered with coils, capacitors, broken clocks, spare tires, chipped tools, and wire spools. An old poster of the Bell X-1 test flight was pinned to the wall beside a cracked mirror, and a faded photo of young Kala, goggles askew and grease on her cheek, hung beneath it. The workshop was more than a building. It was a threshold between the known and unknown. People came to it not just with broken equipment, but with silent hopes. A broken outboard motor was a lifeline. A repaired radio meant connection to a world beyond the cliffs. There was reverence in what her father did, and over time, in what Kala became capable of. The space became hers as much as his. She knew the texture of each bolt drawer, the quirks of the circuit solderer, the exact point where the ceiling leaked during the rains. And when she felt her rejection from the cadet program settle into her bones, it was here she returned, not for comfort, but for clarity. Beyond the town's edge, the geography rose into steep, dry hills that caught the morning light like amber glass. At the highest peak was the old observation post, a relic from decades past, used briefly by naval forces before being abandoned. It was there that Kala often escaped when the workshop felt too full of questions. The walk was long, the path overgrown and uneven, but she didn't mind. At the summit, the view opened like a secret. The entire town stretched below, boats like toys in a bathtub, rooftops glowing in the amber haze, the Pacific reaching out endlessly to the horizon. Up there, she could imagine herself on the runway of some distant airbase, wind against her face, radio crackling in her ear as she took flight. But the environment wasn't only physical. The social atmosphere in Portakavana was a complex terrain of its own. Gossip traveled faster than electricity. Kala had learned young that her silence was a form of defense, a way to keep curiosity from knocking too loudly on her door. People respected her, admired her work ethic, but they also speculated. Why didn't she look like her father? Why had she appeared out of nowhere as a child? Why did the military recruiter, who had once come to town during her school's career week, avoid her eyes and whisper to another officer when they saw her name? There was a quiet mythology forming around her, as often happens in places too small to contain the unexplained. Some thought she was the child of a missing naval pilot. Others suspected she had once belonged to a military research family and been hidden away for protection. A few believed she was simply a prodigy who had risen too far above her station and paid the price. Kala ignored it all, focused instead on the tactile world, on fixing what could be fixed, solving what could be solved. And yet, the setting she inhabited was no longer enough to contain her questions. There were things happening beyond Portakavana, shifts in systems she wasn't part of, but that had somehow wrapped themselves around her life like invisible vines. Her environment, though seemingly small, was quietly threaded with secrets. The observation post, the old naval tower, still pulsing faint signals despite being decommissioned. The frequency she once picked up by accident, that translated into a coded phrase she couldn't forget, Vector Echo Gamma acknowledged. She had dismissed it then. She wouldn't dismiss anything anymore. Because soon, her setting would expand beyond everything she had ever known. Portakavana had raised her, forged her, but it was only the prologue to the life she was about to rediscover. There are many kinds of antagonists in life. Some wear their hostility plainly, carving a clear path of resistance. Others are quieter, hidden behind layers of policy, authority, and precision-crafted smiles. For Kala Ruiz, the opposition she faced was not a single villain, but a complex and faceless machine, a system engineered to filter people like her out before they ever reached the cockpit. That machine wore the badge of the Intercontinental Defense Aviation Authority, or ICDA, a governing coalition of nations who jointly trained elite defense pilots for high-security aerospace programs across the hemisphere. They preached meritocracy but practiced legacy. They spoke of opportunity but trafficked in secrecy. And for reasons Kala couldn't yet understand, they had labeled her a threat the moment her fingerprint hit their database. Her rejection from the South American Aerospace Cadet Program had come in the form of a nondescript digital letter, cold, formulaic, unsigned. It cited a, quote, security-related biometric conflict, language so vague it could mean anything from a clerical error to national espionage. What stung more than the refusal was the silence that followed. No appeals, no explanations, no doors left even slightly ajar. But what Kala didn't know yet was that behind her rejection sat a man named Colonel Reinhold Severin, a high-ranking ICDA operations commander whose entire career revolved around eliminating risk before it ever took flight, and he had seen her file. Severin was a man built by the system he served, raised on military bases from Paraguay to Berlin, educated in classified war colleges, and loyal to structure above all else. To him, unknown variables were dangers. And Kala Ruiz, the girl with a ghost file, a scar that matched a forgotten insignia, and a history scrubbed clean after age 4, was a variable of the highest order. When her ID flagged the system during her application process, Severin had received a direct alert. It wasn't her name that concerned him. It was the embedded code in her DNA scan. A residual marker, long thought purged, from a covert project known only to the highest tier of command, Project Vega. Project Vega had been terminated nearly 2 decades earlier, and its assets were presumed lost in a catastrophic laboratory explosion somewhere off the coast of Argentina. All records had been sealed, survivors disbanded, and remaining data funneled into the most secure vaults within the ICDA's encryption network. No physical links were believed to exist until Kala Ruiz applied to their pilot training program, and her biometric file lit up a dormant encryption lock buried in the archive. The moment her scar was scanned, her collarbone triggered a dormant data signature once used as a remote access key to secure Vega's protocols. That detail was not something Kala could have known. It wasn't something anyone outside Project Vega was supposed to know. Colonel Severin was not a man prone to panic, but that alert had made him stop mid-sentence during a debriefing on hypersonic propulsion testing. He ordered an immediate black flag on her application. No details, no contact, just an internal instruction to, quote, filter and reject. He didn't care that her scores had shattered records. He didn't care that her mechanical intuition was unmatched. He didn't even care that her record was otherwise spotless. All he saw was the possibility of an old secret crawling back to the surface, a secret that could unravel carefully buried truths and expose the ICDA's most controversial chapter. The real antagonist, then, was not Severin himself, but the culture that produced him, the belief that the preservation of secrecy was worth any human cost. Kala's existence threatened a narrative the ICDA had spent 20 years cementing, and so she became collateral. Not because of anything she had done, but because of what she represented. An anomaly with roots in a chapter they had vowed never to reopen. Back in Porto Cavana, she remained unaware of the full scale of this opposition. All she knew was that someone, somewhere, had deemed her unworthy. No, untrustworthy. And in that realization, something began to shift within her. Rejection by incompetence she could accept. But rejection by hidden design stirred a deeper resolve. She no longer wanted to just fly. She wanted to understand why they were afraid to let her. The conflict extended beyond bureaucratic rejection. In subtle ways it began seeping into her surroundings. A few days after the failed application, she noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked near the dock. Men who didn't seem like fishermen or merchants started frequenting the local cantina, pretending to watch football but always asking the wrong questions. Once, when walking home from the workshop, she heard static feedback in her portable radio, the kind that only occurred when a nearby high-frequency scanner was active. These weren't coincidences. Someone was watching her. And yet, they never made contact. No arrests, no accusations, just quiet monitoring, as if waiting to see what she would do next. Then came the moment under the relay tower, during the storm, the accidental glimpse of her scar that set everything into motion. The communications officer's reaction wasn't one of curiosity, it was recognition. That, more than anything, terrified her. The fact that someone could see a faded scar on her skin and respond as though they'd found a key to a vault they thought destroyed, it told her that her past was far bigger than she imagined. She was not the threat, but her existence was. The system she was up against was vast, faceless, and armed with layers of deniability. But systems, as she would soon learn, are only as invincible as the people who uphold them, and not everyone in ICDA shared Severin's convictions. Somewhere in that machinery was a crack, a witness, a record, a forgotten truth, and Cala Ruiz, unknowingly, was the spark that could split it open. The days that followed the incident at the relay tower fell into a strange and unsettling pattern. At first glance, nothing in Puerto Cabana appeared to change. The boats still left the dock before sunrise. The fishermen still grumbled about the tides. The market still rang with the same calls for fresh sardines and mangoes, and the air still carried the familiar tang of salt, diesel, and seaweed. But for Cala Ruiz, something invisible had shifted. She had lived her life attuned to the quiet nuances of her surroundings, the subtle shifts in wind, the tremble of machines before they failed, the unspoken cues in a person's posture that revealed more than their words. And now, everything around her hummed with a new, strange tension. Each morning she resumed her work at the workshop, but even routine repairs felt charged with a different energy. Her hands moved the same, but her mind was now constantly half distracted, looping through what had happened under that storm tower. The scar on her collarbone, which she had long ago stopped thinking about, now felt like a code she had never learned to decipher. And since that night, odd patterns had begun to emerge. Things that couldn't be explained away as coincidence. One morning, she noticed her toolset rearranged, with the torque wrench set slightly off angle, not the way she left it. The following evening, her father's radio scanner turned itself on without prompt, playing a soft loop of static and then a sharp click, like a signal waiting to be received. No one else noticed, but Cala did. She always noticed. She began to suspect she was being watched again, but this time it felt different, less like surveillance, and more like an assessment. A few of the unfamiliar faces she'd seen lingering around town before her rejection returned, often alone, sometimes pretending to be tourists or surveyors, always polite, never asking too much. One even left a pair of gloves behind in the workshop after pretending to need directions to the next port. When Cala inspected them later, she found a small, metallic tag sewn into the seam, one that blinked red once, and then faded to black when touched. A tracker. She burned the gloves in a steel barrel behind the shop. As the days passed, the pattern grew clearer. Every 3 nights, a single drone, quiet, matte black, unmarked, passed overhead around 2:14 a.m., low enough to rattle the loose shingles of her roof. It wasn't the kind of commercial drone used by media crews or delivery services. It was sleeker, heavier, and bore the unmistakable weight of government design. Cala began keeping a log of its movements. She marked its direction, its altitude, its angle relative to the moon. She noticed that each time it flew over, the power in her room flickered for exactly 1 second. Never more, never less. It was as if the drone was pinging for something. Or someone. At first, she told herself she was being paranoid. The brain could stitch coincidences into patterns when given enough fear to feed on. But then she found the notebook. It was tucked beneath the loose panel of her father's workbench, a place she hadn't touched since he fell ill months earlier and stopped working alongside her. The notebook was wrapped in a weathered oilcloth and bound by a leather strap. Inside were pages of tight handwriting, schematic sketches, and old coordinates. There were notes labeled V Protocol, Ghost Frequency 313.17, and a set of dates that spanned a 5-year window, years she couldn't remember. One of the entries read, "They said she wouldn't survive, but I saw her pull herself out of the fire." Calla sat frozen for nearly an hour, staring at the line. Her father had never spoken of a fire. He had never spoken of anything that came before she was 5. And now, here in his own careful script, was an admission that there had been something before, something explosive, traumatic, and hidden. The more she read, the more she realized her father had known more than he ever let on. He had been watching the skies, too. He had been listening to signals. He had been preparing, not just for someone to come looking, but for the moment she might start looking herself. The ritual became clearer now. She had been part of a pattern long before she realized it. The silence in her childhood. The mechanical focus. The endless drills her father insisted on when she was just a child. Teaching her Morse code before bedtime, running disaster simulations in the garage, asking her to memorize escape routes from their house. At the time, she thought it was just his way of teaching discipline, of coping with the isolation of their coastal life. But now, with the notebook in her hands and a scar that had triggered a classified response, she saw it differently. It wasn't survival training, it was preparation. Each strange occurrence since her rejection now formed a loop. Each detail had a place. The drone's timing, the false tourists, the static bursts from the radio, the gloves, the notebook. Her rejection hadn't been an isolated act of bureaucracy. It had been a signal. A gate that was never meant to open had cracked, and now the machine behind it was trying to contain the breach. But she had seen too much. Felt too much. She couldn't unsee the fear in the officer's eyes the night her scar was exposed. She couldn't forget the way the men had spoken of Project Vega with the caution of those handling something volatile. Calla knew she was being pulled into something bigger than herself, a ritual decades in the making. A ritual of denial, suppression, and quiet surveillance. The pattern was now undeniable. Silence, followed by signal, followed by subtle pursuit. They hadn't come for her directly. Not yet. Because they weren't sure what she remembered. Or worse, they were waiting for her to awaken something they couldn't afford to lose control of. But Calla Ruiz had never been content with silence. She had spent her entire life fixing broken systems, deciphering tangled code, and coaxing life out of dead circuits. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide. She would trace the pattern to its origin. Because now, it was personal. And she was done waiting for permission to understand who she truly was. The days that followed were a strange mix of waiting and processing, as Ayla stayed temporarily at an air transport command facility near the southern coast. No one had told her much beyond the fact that her presence had triggered a data node, and that node had rerouted her entire case to a department not even listed in her original rejection letter. With each hour that passed, her mind twisted deeper into possibilities, her military-honed patience dueling with a sense of nervous excitement. She stayed off the grid, eating alone in the mess, training her body in the facility's small gym, and walking the base perimeter late into the night. Everyone around her seemed to either know more than they were letting on, or were pretending not to notice her presence at all. Then, on the 4th morning, just before dawn, a quiet knock on her temporary quarters broke the silence. A woman entered, dressed not in Flight Command blues but in a sleek gray uniform that Ayla didn't recognize. Her demeanor was calm, precise, her hair tucked tight under a minimal cap. She introduced herself only as Commander Vela and motioned for Ayla to follow. No explanations, no gear. Just a silent walk through a hallway that seemed colder than the rest of the base. They entered a windowless room with a monitor screen, a single chair, and a biometric scanner on the table. Ayla was told to place her left shoulder against the scanner. She did. There was a pause. Then the screen lit up, not with her personnel file, but with footage. Grainy, time-stamped footage of a desert outpost overrun by militants 7 years ago. Ayla immediately recognized the incident. It was the mission where she had sustained her collarbone injury. But this was not footage she had ever seen before. The video zoomed in on a figure, herself, dragging a wounded intelligence officer across a rocky ridge, fire blazing behind her, the camera shaking from helicopter rotors. Then a data overlay appeared, showing encrypted transmissions she had relayed while under fire. Classified distress codes, clearance tags, real-time battlefield decisions that weren't hers to make, yet she had made them anyway. Ayla swallowed hard as the realization sank in. She hadn't just survived that mission, she had triggered something much bigger. Commander Vela turned to her then and said quietly that those codes had not only saved the lives of 2 embedded cryptologists, but had indirectly shut down an arms pipeline that was funneling illegal drones into Allied airspace. What had been deemed a routine medical evacuation at the time had in fact been a pivot point in a Black Channel operation, and because she wasn't in intelligence, and because of the compartmentalized nature of the op, she had never been told. Until now. Ayla stared at the footage, emotions churning. She had always known that mission had been different. The way her comms had gone live when no satellite was supposed to be overhead. The strange delay in their extraction. The way her report had been sealed with no debriefing. She had chalked it all up to bureaucracy. But now she saw it had been by design. The scar on her collarbone wasn't just a physical reminder of pain. It was a literal biometric key, implanted with a data chip that had survived the blast and been reactivated only because her body had re-encountered the same kind of encrypted environment. They hadn't just denied her pilot training because of bureaucracy. They had denied it because she was already on a different path, one she had never even consented to, but one that had identified her years ago as a viable candidate for something deeper, something more hidden. Commander Vela explained that what Ayla had unwittingly proven during that mission wasn't just bravery or skill. It was pattern recognition under duress, command instinct under no formal directive, and the capacity to operate within encrypted threat environments while maintaining cognitive integrity. In simpler terms, she had passed a test no one knew how to administer, until her scar triggered the secure channel and confirmed what the system had buried. Ayla sat in silence for several long moments. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her chest since the moment her application was rejected. What now? Vela's expression shifted. The kind of shift that only came when someone was about to rewrite your understanding of reality. She told Ayla that there was a division, operating above conventional ranks, above branches even, that needed people like her, not soldiers, not pilots, but interpreters of uncertain environments, tactical translators of incomplete data, operatives who could both fly and decide, who could command not just from the air, but within the folds of modern warfare's invisible corridors. It wasn't a promotion. It was a conscription into a realm where command was decentralized, missions weren't recorded, and success was measured not in medals, but in the absence of headlines. And Ayla. She didn't flinch. She accepted the briefing, not because she fully understood it yet, but because it made sense of all the things in her life that had never made sense before. The scar that wouldn't fade, the instincts she was told were too sharp, the disconnection she always felt from the neat structures of normal military life. She realized then that her rejection from pilot training hadn't been a mistake, it had been a filter. The kind meant to flush out everyone except the one who wasn't willing to stop just because she was told no. The collarbone scar had triggered the secure channel, but her persistence had already unlocked something deeper, access to a new kind of sky. There was something surreal about sitting at the edge of a dream and wondering if it had ever truly belonged to you. That's how Ava felt as she sat cross-legged in the gravel behind the hangar, grease smudging the sleeves of her jumpsuit, her eyes locked on the silhouette of a jet slicing through the dusky clouds above. A few feet away, instructors and trainees gathered around a whiteboard, planning the next round of assessments. They didn't notice her absence, or maybe they did, and simply didn't care. Ava had been given clearance to remain in the program, but only as a quote, technical observer. She wasn't flying. She was watching, maintaining, assisting. It was supposed to be a compromise, a way to include her without fully trusting her. But to Ava, it felt like exile. That afternoon, she replayed what she had heard during her last evaluation meeting. Given her medical history, especially the nature of the trauma, we cannot endorse field training at this time. They didn't say the word scar, but she saw the way their eyes flicked to her collarbone, how their posture shifted when she walked in. They knew something they weren't saying. The scar had become a silent barrier, one Ava couldn't decode. It wasn't just about medical safety. It was something deeper, more protected, something whispered behind closed doors. Ava had tried not to dwell on it, but her curiosity had long since curdled into suspicion. The scar was more than just a remnant of her childhood accident. That much she was certain of now. There were too many questions that no one seemed willing to answer. Why had her adoption files been sealed twice over, even after she'd come of age? Why had Dr. Hollings, the psychologist she'd been forced to meet after her admission to the academy, asked more questions about the scar than about her mental preparedness? And why, when she'd finally pressed her recruiter, had he muttered something about higher clearance before clamming up entirely? That evening, long after most of the cadets had returned to their barracks, Ava lingered in the simulation room, pretending to recalibrate one of the broken controls on the VR rig. But she was watching the system logs scroll past, looking for anything unusual. She wasn't sure what she hoped to find. Some code, some error, a security flag, anything. She'd almost given up when a prompt flashed across the screen. A system update. Routine. But as she moved to accept it, her shoulder accidentally brushed against the control panel's edge. Her collarbone struck the biometric surface embedded in the desk, normally used for advanced instructor logins. A sharp tone rang out, then silence. The screen flashed white. A second later, the room dimmed and rebooted into a restricted interface she had never seen before. Her breath caught. On the screen were 4 words she couldn't immediately process. Secure channel, Echo Iris. She reached forward, heart pounding, and tapped the prompt. A voice crackled through the speaker, a calm, authoritative tone with no visual identifier. Echo Iris protocol activated. Secondary verification pending. Confirm operative identification. Ava blinked, trying to understand. Before she could speak, the panel scanned her collarbone again. The screen flickered, and then a new window popped open, displaying rows of encrypted files and video footage stamped with military insignia she didn't recognize. The voice continued, unfazed. Welcome back, Cadet Avelina Rune. Status: temporarily dormant. Reactivation request acknowledged. Ava stumbled back, gripping the edge of the desk. Avelina Rune. No one called her that, not since her earliest years at the orphanage. Rune was the name she barely remembered, the one listed on the few unredacted documents she'd been allowed to keep. Her hands trembled as she clicked open the top file. A series of security logs played, documenting her rescue at the age of 6, complete with timestamps, location markers, and mission tags, one of which read, Subject Extraction, Echo Iris 03, Preserve and Observe. The footage showed a chaotic, fiery scene, a covert military team pulling a tiny, bloodied child from the ruins of what looked like a demolished research facility. Ava, her arm limp, her collarbone shattered, her face covered in soot, she watched in horror and disbelief as she was carried into a waiting aircraft. Behind the soldier carrying her, a man, tall, dressed in a long coat with a face blurred out, walked swiftly, nodding at the medic. Scar must remain, he said to someone off camera, encoded with the signal, future recognition point. Ava's knees gave out and she sank into the seat behind her, eyes fixed on the monitor. The voice returned. Would you like to access mission continuation protocols? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mind reeled with the implications. Her scar wasn't just a remnant. It was a key a biometric code woven into her body to recognize her as part of a program she'd never known she belonged to. A sleeper protocol, buried under years of silence. Someone, somewhere, had been watching, waiting for her to trigger the right combination, to remember who she really was. Later that night, the base experienced an unannounced lockdown. Personnel were rerouted, external communications suspended, and command officers gathered in secure briefing rooms. No explanation was given. But Ava noticed the sudden change in how people looked at her. She was summoned to Commander Price's office without delay. The man who had once looked at her with gentle pity now studied her like a chess piece repositioned. "So," he finally said, his voice low, "the system remembered you." She nodded slowly, still unsure what that even meant. "Then I suppose it's time we stop pretending you're just another trainee." His words weren't warm, but they weren't cold either. They carried weight, recognition. When Ava left the office, she didn't return to the dorms. Instead, she was escorted to a different wing, one she hadn't known existed. There, under biometric access and silent surveillance, was a room marked Operative Recall Program. Her scar had opened a door, not just metaphorically, but literally. And behind that door, her entire identity, her past, her purpose, her future, was waiting to be rediscovered. A cold, surgical silence fell over the room as Nora sat opposite a panel of 7 men and women, each more unreadable than the last. She was seated at the Airbridge Advanced Aeronautics Command Academy's final appeal hearing, a formality, she had been told, since her initial rejection was already logged and processed. But formality didn't feel like the right word. It felt like a funeral, her own. She'd prepared a portfolio, memorized every procedural manual, internalized over a dozen aircraft systems and specs. She had written, rewritten, and rehearsed her statement until it felt like a military chant. But when she began speaking, her voice trembled, not from uncertainty, but from a fatigue so deep that it reached her bones. She spoke of her father's service, of her own simulations and coursework, her honors at the Gibraltar Air Institute, her letters of recommendation from decorated former instructors, and even her volunteer flight logistics work during the Chiron wildfires. And still, they stared back at her, motionless, silent, seemingly unmoved. Then Commander Riggins, head of the panel, and a man with medals decorating his chest like badges of stone-cold detachment, closed her folder and tapped it lightly against the table. He leaned forward with a kind of mechanical sympathy, as if reading from a script. He said the Academy appreciated her persistence, but due to her medical history, particularly Wedawue, quote, unidentified scar tissue in proximity to the brachial plexus and clavicle, she remained ineligible for the Pilot Integration Initiative, her scar. Again. Nora inhaled deeply, as if oxygen could fill the growing void in her chest. She tried to argue that it had never impaired her mobility, that her physical assessments had come back exemplary, that the Academy's own surgeon had cleared her in the pre-admissions phase. But Commander Riggins simply replied that anomalies not fully accounted for posed a security risk, not necessarily to the aircraft, but to larger protocols. That phrasing haunted her. Larger protocols? It was clear now that this wasn't about the scar being a medical issue. It was something else. Something she wasn't being told. The meeting was adjourned with no further questions. Nora stood, stiffly saluting, and turned away before the sting in her eyes could betray her composure. She walked out into the courtyard with the precision of someone pretending they still belonged. The sun was blinding, the kind of cruel blue that mocked her. Her footsteps echoed against stone and glass, and she felt like each one was stamping her further into the role of someone who had once come close to something sacred and was now locked forever on the outside. She didn't even hear Officer Ellen fall into step beside her until she asked, in a voice carefully balanced between professional and personal, if she was okay. Nora simply nodded, her lips tight, her jaw tighter. Ellen didn't push, but she handed Nora a folded slip of paper, like someone passing contraband, and murmured, "You didn't hear this from me, but I think you'll want to look into this access code. If something doesn't feel right, maybe it isn't." Nora didn't open it until she was back in her quarters, seated on her cot, eyes tracing the same institutional wall she had stared at for the past 18 months. The code was simple: N4RC0RE117. Beneath it was a brief string of coordinates and a time: 3:10. She stared at it, heart pounding slowly, like a mechanical drum. This was not just a consolation prize. This was a door. But to what? That night, when the facility lights dimmed to night mode amber and cadets were sealed behind biometric dorm locks, Nora dressed in her training blacks and slipped out the maintenance tunnel she had discovered months ago while scouting wind flow patterns. The coordinates led her to an unmarked structure on the southern edge of the training compound, a forgotten dome with ivy-coated panels and a half-buried radar dish jutting out like the skeleton of a long-dead creature. The door accepted the access code. A hiss. A click. The inside was bathed in dull green lights and smelled of dust and ozone, and then the screen blinked awake. A soft hum, like something alive, began to fill the chamber. It wasn't just any terminal. It was linked to the Concord Vault, a secure channel designated for ultra-classified military data. She shouldn't have had access to it. No cadet should. Nora approached, her hands trembling slightly as she placed her palm against the reader. She expected rejection, a blare, a lockdown. But instead, the system pulsed and chirped, identity confirmed. Then a prompt: Collarbone ID match. Neural scar signature verified. Welcome, NRH1A. She froze. NRH1A? That wasn't her Academy ID. It wasn't even a personnel classification she recognized. Files began to open themselves, one by one, in a cascade of archive missions, restricted genetic profiles, neurological experiments, and redacted aerial logs. It was dizzying. And right in the center of it, images of infants with surgical diagrams, neural links embedded in shoulder-based hardware. She saw one labeled Nora Helix, Operation Eclipse 9, Subject Number 14. A flood of adrenaline surged through her, nausea curling in her stomach. Her scar. It wasn't an injury, it was an implant, one tied to a covert neural aviation interface from an aborted project more than 20 years ago. She was born into this. Literally. Not just trained, but genetically calibrated. Not just pre-selected, but embedded. The realization cracked something in her. She sat down, unable to speak, unable to scream. For all her training, her failures, her questions about why she always felt things differently, this was the key. Not only was she meant to fly, she was designed to. And someone, somewhere, was terrified of what would happen if she did. The weeks that followed moved with an odd rhythm, a strange combination of ordinary and extraordinary. Marin returned to her maintenance post on the base, assigned to assist with parts logistics and drone system testing, a position that kept her within reach of the flight line but not in the air. While she dutifully performed her work, something within her had undeniably shifted. After her strange encounter with Colonel Devereaux and the exposure of the scar that had opened a secure channel, whispers followed her like vapor trails. None of them were spoken to her directly, but she caught glimpses, pauses in conversations when she entered a room, subtle glances exchanged between senior officers, and once, a lieutenant muttering, "The girl with the cipher bone." It was disorienting, and yet, Marin had never felt more grounded in her purpose. In the solitude of her shared quarters, she began to revisit memories she'd tried to forget. The scar on her collarbone had come from an incident she was told never to speak of. It was not from a crash or childhood accident, but a rescue, one in which she had been pulled from a sinking covert aircraft as a child by a figure she still couldn't place. That mission, according to fragmented reports she'd pieced together from her late father's encrypted journal, had been classified under Omega-3 level clearance. Only those involved in Black Ops aviation or off-record recon flights would know what it meant. Her scar hadn't just marked her survival, it had branded her part of something bigger. But she couldn't dwell on shadows. not when her hands were now inside engines. With each drone panel she closed, or avionics diagnostic she ran, Marin was reminded of the reason she wanted to fly in the first place. The feeling of motion, the communion with wind and sky, the unrelenting truth that when she was airborne, no one could dismiss her for her past or her story. That longing didn't dull, it sharpened. Then, just as things began to feel normal again, she was summoned. A base-wide alert flashed through the intercom, and a lieutenant from operations came running toward her in the hangar, breathless and wide-eyed. He handed her a slip of paper, an analog protocol used only for high-clearance transfers, and simply said, "You're to report to Building Echo 7. Now." Confused, Marin hesitated for just a second before wiping her hands, securing her tools, and jogging toward the far side of the airfield. Echo 7 wasn't on any of the official base maps, but every recruit knew the legend. It was the old Cold War bunker that had supposedly been decommissioned 2 decades ago. But the presence of guards, biometric scanners, and camera orbs floating silently in the air told another story. As she approached, the steel doors opened with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a narrow tunnel descending into the earth. She swallowed hard, squared her shoulders, and stepped inside. The chill of underground concrete met her skin like a second atmosphere. She was guided through a serpentine hallway lit with a sterile blue glow until she reached a vault-like room lined with monitors, servers, and one long glass table in the center. Seated at the table were 3 individuals dressed not in uniforms, but in plain gray suits, faces unfamiliar except for one, Colonel Devereaux. They motioned for her to sit, and one of the agents spoke without pleasantries. "Cadet Marin Kessler, what we're about to discuss never leaves this room. Do you understand?" She nodded, heart hammering. They explained what she already suspected. The scar she bore had come from a recovery mission during a top-secret extraction 15 years ago. Her father, who had served as a tactical pilot in off-grid operations, had embedded a nanosignal under her skin, designed to activate only under specific circumstances. That protocol was triggered during her medical scan after the flight test rejection, something no one had anticipated. The agent continued, revealing that her biometrics matched a dormant clearance line, one that gave her not just access to information, but eligibility for a different kind of training, one she had never even imagined. They called it Project Altura, a black program designed to train elite aviators for missions involving prototype crafts and untraceable flight paths. Only 4 candidates had ever been selected. She would be the 5th. And she hadn't been chosen through standard channels. She had been born into it. Marin sat motionless, absorbing each word like it was oxygen. Her world tilted once more, but this time it tilted toward possibility. She asked the only question that mattered. "Does this mean I'll fly?" The agent smiled faintly. "Not just fly. If you accept, you'll become the eyes above operations most of the world doesn't know exist. You'll fly beyond borders, beyond rules. But it won't be easy. It never was meant to be." That night, Marin lay awake in a new bunk, this one located in an underground barracks deep beneath the regular base. Her belongings had been moved, her identity was being restructured, and she had only 24 hours to commit fully to the program. There would be no returning to the maintenance floor, no more arguing with instructors or pushing paper applications. Her old life had quietly folded into history, and the woman who had been rejected from pilot school now stood at the doorstep of something unimaginable. The echoes of past doubts still whispered at the edges of her mind, but a deeper voice rose above them now, the same voice that had kept her focused during years of dismissal, the same instinct that had made her reach for the sky again and again. Tomorrow, she would enter simulation rooms used only by shadows. She would train in aircraft that didn't exist on public records, and she would carry the legacy of a scar that had always been more than just a mark. It had been a message that she was meant for more. The days that followed Marin's induction into Project Altura unfolded like a hidden chapter of history suddenly revealed. She was immersed in a world where every lesson, every mission simulation, every piece of equipment was designed to operate beyond conventional limits and beyond the eyes of most military officials. The training was rigorous beyond anything she had experienced at the Airbridge Academy, demanding not just technical precision, but an acute sense of intuition, judgment, and adaptability. She was introduced to aircraft that could maneuver in ways that defied standard aerodynamics and given flight suits embedded with neuroresponsive sensors that linked directly to her biometrics. Every detail was calibrated to her unique physiology, the same physiology marked by the scar that had once been dismissed as a liability but now served as a vital security key. The instructors were not traditional pilots but veterans of clandestine operations, each carrying their own veiled histories and unspoken understandings. They recognized in Marin not just a trainee, but a linchpin of a legacy they'd been guarding for years. It wasn't long before the truth of her origins became impossible to ignore. Through encrypted briefings and carefully curated data dumps, Marin learned that her father had been a pivotal figure in a covert initiative known as the Helix Protocol, a project aimed at integrating biological enhancements with aerial combat capabilities. The scar she bore was no accident. It was the visible sign of an experimental implant designed to interface with classified flight systems. More than a mark, it was a literal connection, a physical access point to a secure network of flight operations that operated in shadows. She wasn't simply a pilot denied by red tape. She was the intended successor of a hidden program, born into a purpose she had unknowingly carried since infancy. The full scope of Project Altura was staggering. It operated on the fringes of national security, tasked with missions so sensitive that no public records existed. Reconnaissance over denied territories, interception of untraceable drones, covert transport of critical assets, operations where failure meant the loss of entire covert networks, or worse, global destabilization. Marin's initial skepticism gave way to a profound sense of responsibility, as she understood that the scar on her collarbone wasn't a flaw but a key, one that secured her rightful place in this unseen world. It was a validation she had craved, but had never imagined in this form. In one of her first simulations, she piloted a prototype jet dubbed the Valkyrie, a craft equipped with AI-assisted flight controls linked directly to the pilot's neural signals. As she engaged the simulation, the cockpit's interface shimmered with data streams that flowed into her consciousness, responding to thought commands almost instantaneously. The system acknowledged her neural implant and adapted dynamically, increasing sensitivity to her responses. It was unlike anything she'd flown before, both exhilarating and terrifying. The lines between pilot and machine blurred, demanding a harmony that tested every ounce of her focus and resolve. During debriefings, she was told that many candidates had failed to achieve this symbiosis, their bodies rejecting the neural link or their minds overwhelmed by the constant data influx. But Marin's biological enhancements, tied to her scar and her father's research, made her uniquely suited. The medical assessments confirmed that the implant not only enhanced her cognitive function under stress, but also insulated her neural pathways from sensory overload. She was built to fly at this level, even if she had never been told. Despite the gravity of her newfound role, Marin remained grounded by memories of rejection and doubt. The shadow of the Academy's earlier denial lingered like a ghost. Yet now, instead of bitterness, it fueled her determination. She was determined to prove not only to the secretive commanders of Project Altura, but to herself, that she was more than a discarded cadet. Her public vindication came quietly but powerfully. A high-ranking official from the Joint Command for Covert Air Operations arrived at the underground facility, bringing with him an unsealed letter bearing the insignia of the National Defense Council. The letter formally recognized Marin's role within Project Altura, acknowledging her father's foundational contributions and her own successful integration into the program. It was a moment of official redemption. The academic rejection had been rescinded posthumously, and the real reasons behind it were disclosed, albeit within secure channels and classified archives. News of her role was not broadcast on any media or public record, but within military circles, it rippled through like a quiet storm. Commanders who once doubted her now sought her counsel on experimental flight tactics and neural interface optimization. Former instructors who had turned her away extended nods of respect when paths crossed. The scar, once a symbol of exclusion, had transformed into an emblem of achievement. Marin herself found a profound shift in how she saw her own reflection. No longer a girl marked by misfortune, but a woman empowered by purpose. Yet the real test was only beginning. The mission briefs became increasingly complex, involving real-time decisions that carried consequences beyond simulations. Marin was tasked with coordinating flight paths that intersected with hostile airspace, navigating electronic warfare environments where the difference between success and failure was razor-thin. Her capacity to merge with the neural-linked systems allowed her to anticipate threats before they appeared on radar, responding with a fluidity that no conventional pilot could match. This demonstration of true character, combining skill, courage, and an unwavering moral compass, set Marin apart. She was no longer merely reacting. She was leading, shaping outcomes in real time with a confidence born from understanding the weight of every choice. The contrast between her earlier exclusion and her current command was stark, yet it illuminated the deeper truth of her journey. Sometimes, the greatest barriers hide the greatest potential, and only those willing to persist through uncertainty discover the breadth of their true strength. In the quiet moments between missions, Marin often traced her fingers over the faint ridges of her collarbone scar, a tactile reminder of where her story had begun and how far she had come. The scar had been a threshold, first to rejection, then to revelation, and finally to vindication. It was a legacy etched in flesh, a symbol that transcended pain to become the key that unlocked a destiny she was only beginning to fully embrace. The revelation of Marin's true role within Project Altura sent ripples through the lives of those closest to her, though the depth of the changes remained concealed beneath layers of classified silence. Her relationships, once grounded in the ordinary routines of cadet life and simple camaraderie, transformed as the weight of her hidden legacy became undeniable. Former colleagues who had dismissed her now sought her insight, while old friendships strained under the distance her new responsibilities imposed. Yet through the shifting tides, Marin found a quiet resilience growing within her, fueled by a sense of purpose, deeper than any she had known before. Her family, distant yet unspoken in official records, was one of the hardest adjustments. Though she had lost her father years ago, his legacy now played a pivotal role in her life. She discovered encrypted messages he had left behind in secure archives, letters written in code, filled with guidance and encouragement for the successor he knew she would become. These messages, uncovered in hidden compartments of Project Altura's databanks, were a lifeline, bridging the chasm of absence with whispered wisdom. Marin began to understand her place, not just as an operative, but as the continuation of a lineage forged in sacrifice and shadow. The past was no longer a closed chapter, it was the foundation of her new identity. At the same time, the people around her adapted in their own ways. Commander Devereaux, who had initially overseen her introduction to the covert program, became a reluctant mentor. Their conversations, once curt and procedural, grew into deeper dialogues about strategy, ethics, and the burdens of unseen service. He admitted with a rare flicker of vulnerability that the decision to initially block her path had weighed heavily on him. Protocols, he had said, are necessary, but sometimes they blind us to what a person can truly become. His respect was no longer guarded but genuine, a silent acknowledgement of the journey Marin had undertaken. Yet the broader world outside the underground bunkers remained unaware. To the public and most of the military, Marin was still the cadet who had been denied training, the girl with the scar who didn't fit the mold. It was a dichotomy that sometimes left her feeling fractured, as though living in two parallel realities. But with each successful mission, and each moment she mastered the advanced neural interfaces, the gulf between those worlds narrowed within her own mind. She learned to carry both truths simultaneously, the visible, ordinary life and the secret, extraordinary calling. New opportunities emerged as well. Invitations arrived from allied intelligence agencies seeking collaboration on covert aerial reconnaissance, and private aerospace firms began to inquire about her insights into bio-integrated flight systems. Though she could not disclose her true role, Marin found herself becoming a quiet innovator, advising on the edges of emerging aviation technology. Her name, once absent from official rosters, began to circulate in hushed tones among those who understood the stakes. It was the kind of recognition that did not seek headlines but demanded respect. Amidst all this, the base itself evolved. Areas once sealed off for clandestine training began to open marginally, accommodating new recruits who exhibited unique physiological markers similar to Marin's. The program that had once seemed like an anomaly now became a burgeoning operation with growing significance. The dynamics among personnel shifted as awareness of these secret legacies grew, fostering an environment that balanced suspicion with cautious hope. In this evolving ecosystem, Marin emerged as both a symbol and a catalyst, a living testament to the power of persistence and the importance of hidden strength. The emotional terrain was not without its challenges. Moments of isolation returned, especially during long nights when the hum of servers and distant drone flights filled the underground halls. The burden of secrecy weighed heavily, and the memory of the initial rejection, the closed doors, the whispered doubts, sometimes pressed against her confidence like a cold shadow. But she met those moments with a newfound grace, anchored by the knowledge that her journey was part of a larger narrative, one that extended beyond individual trials to a broader legacy. In those quiet hours, she often revisited the scar on her collarbone, tracing its contours with fingers that now understood its significance. It was no longer a symbol of pain or exclusion, but a mark of identity, a physical testament to survival, to hidden purpose, and to the unyielding resilience that had carried her through every obstacle. The scar had become a bridge, connecting her past to her present and pointing toward an uncertain yet hopeful future. The consequences of her revelation rippled beyond Marin alone. The antagonists who had once dismissed her were forced to confront their own biases and the limitations of rigid protocols. Command structures adapted, opening channels for more inclusive recognition of unconventional talent, and acknowledging that true capability often transcended standardized assessments. The secret nature of Project Altura underscored the complexity of modern defense, where visible ranks and credentials were insufficient measures of readiness. By the time Marin was fully integrated into operational command, her transformation was complete, not just as a pilot or operative, but as a figure emblematic of change within an institution often resistant to it. Her presence inspired others who felt overlooked or underestimated, encouraging them to see beyond imposed limits and trust in their unique strengths. She became a quiet beacon, proving that legacy was not merely inherited but forged through courage, persistence, and the willingness to embrace one's true self. As dawn broke over the base one morning, Marin stood on the tarmac watching a fleet of new aircraft prepared for deployment. The sky stretched wide and unbroken, a canvas of endless possibility. In that moment, she understood that the journey was far from over. The scar that had once been a source of rejection had become a symbol of triumph, unlocking not only her own destiny, but opening doors for those who would follow. Her story was no longer one of denial, but of vindication, a legacy carried forward on wings of resilience and hope. The legacy that Marin carried was no longer confined to the dimly lit corridors of Project Altura's underground base. It was beginning to resonate far beyond those walls, extending its influence into the broader world of aviation, security, and inspiration. Her journey from rejection to recognition became an emblem of the enduring power of perseverance, the triumph of hidden potential, and the profound impact of embracing one's unique identity. Though the specifics of her missions remained classified, the ripple effect of her story reached colleagues, allies, and even young aspirants who found in her example a reflection of their own struggles and hopes. In training halls and recruitment centers across allied nations, whispers of a pilot who had broken barriers through a scar etched into her flesh stirred a quiet revolution of belief. Those who had faced setbacks or exclusion began to see the possibility of a path forward, fueled by Marin's experience. Her story became a catalyst for change, challenging rigid protocols and inspiring a reevaluation of how talent and capability were measured. Where once biometric anomalies and unconventional histories were grounds for dismissal, new programs emerged to identify and nurture hidden strengths, forging a more inclusive future for aviation and defense. Within the secretive layers of Project Altura, Marin's influence helped reshape the culture. The program evolved from a clandestine operation into a pioneering force, integrating bioneural technology with pilot training. Marin, alongside other operatives, contributed to advancing flight systems that harmonized human intuition with machine precision, pushing the boundaries of what was possible in aerial combat and reconnaissance. Her collaboration with engineers and neuroscientists fostered innovations that not only enhanced performance but also safeguarded the mental well-being of pilots navigating these high-stress environments. In this way, her legacy became a bridge between human resilience and technological evolution. Marin's personal transformation also embodied a universal message: the power of embracing one's scars, both physical and emotional, as symbols of survival and strength. Her collarbone scar, once a barrier, became a beacon, illuminating the truth that wounds do not define weakness, but can be keys to unlocking hidden doors. She spoke of this in carefully curated forums and confidential seminars designed for military and civilian audiences alike, emphasizing the importance of resilience, self-acceptance, and the courage to challenge imposed limits. Her words, measured yet heartfelt, resonated deeply, fostering a culture of empathy and empowerment. Beyond the immediate sphere of aviation and defense, Marin's story touched the wider societal landscape, weaving into conversations about identity, inclusion, and the often unseen battles individuals face. Media profiles, although limited and carefully managed to protect sensitive details, portrayed her as a symbol of overcoming systemic obstacles, inspiring discussions about how institutions might evolve to better recognize and support diverse talents. Her journey became a reference point in advocacy circles, pushing for transparency, adaptability, and the dismantling of outdated barriers in fields traditionally governed by rigid standards. The moral thread woven through Marin's experience was clear: true potential often lies buried beneath layers of misunderstanding, fear, or prejudice, and only by daring to look beyond the surface can we uncover the strengths that redefine our world. Her life was a testament to the idea that legacy is not solely inherited through bloodlines or rank, but is actively created through perseverance, integrity, and the willingness to confront adversity. The scar on her collarbone was not just a physical mark, but a metaphor for the indelible impact each person carries, shaping their journey and the lives of those who follow. As Marin looked toward the horizon, her thoughts reached beyond her own mission. She envisioned a future where stories like hers would no longer be rare exceptions, but a common narrative, where those once marginalized would be embraced for their unique contributions, where technology and humanity coalesce to create unprecedented possibilities, and where every scar, visible or hidden, was honored as a mark of strength. This vision was not utopian. It was an achievable evolution sparked by individuals who dared to challenge the status quo and by institutions brave enough to listen. Her call to action was subtle yet profound: to recognize that within each person lies a reservoir of resilience waiting to be acknowledged, that setbacks are not endpoints but chapters in a larger story, and that the courage to embrace one's full identity is the foundation of true transformation. Marin urged her listeners and readers alike to see scars not as flaws but as keys that unlock doors to new opportunities, deeper understanding, and broader horizons. In doing so, she inspired a generation to move forward with purpose, compassion, and unshakable hope. The legacy of the girl who had once been refused pilot training because of a collarbone scar had grown into a movement that transcended secrecy and classification. It had become a beacon for those who believed that every obstacle contains a hidden path, and that the most powerful stories are those of redemption and empowerment. Marin's journey, marked by resilience, revelation, and ultimate vindication, was a reminder that sometimes the greatest battles are fought within, and the most profound victories are those that open the way for others to rise. As dawn painted the sky with streaks of gold and rose, Marin stood once more on the tarmac, watching the horizon expand endlessly before her. The scar beneath her flight suit hummed softly, a quiet signal of all she had overcome and all that lay ahead. In that moment, she understood that legacy is living. It grows, evolves, and inspires, carried forward not only by those who bear it, but by everyone touched by its light. The transformation that began with a secret code and a scar etched into flesh rippled outward in ways Marin had never anticipated. Her emergence as a key figure within Project Altura had placed her at the crossroads of technology, human potential, and a shadowy world of aerial operations few could even imagine. Yet beyond the classified briefings and covert missions, there was a quieter, more personal journey unfolding, a journey that touched not only her life, but the lives of those around her and those she had yet to meet. As she embraced the complexity of her identity and the weight of her legacy, Marin found herself stepping into roles that transcended pilot or operative, becoming a mentor, an innovator, and a symbol of possibility. Within the confines of the underground base, Marin began to lead training sessions for new recruits exhibiting rare biometrics similar to her own. These cadets came from varied backgrounds, some overlooked by traditional programs, others with scars, both physical and emotional, that had previously been considered liabilities. Marin's guidance was grounded not only in technical expertise, but in empathy and understanding. She understood what it meant to be dismissed, and the courage it took to persevere. Her approach combined rigorous training with an emphasis on self-acceptance and resilience, fostering an environment where these future pilots could flourish without fear of rejection. Slowly, a new culture was taking shape within Project Altura, one that valued the whole individual, recognizing that true strength arose from embracing one's scars and stories rather than hiding them. Simultaneously, Marin collaborated with aerospace engineers and neuroscientists to refine the bioneural interface technologies that had defined her own integration into the program. Drawing from her first-hand experiences, she advocated for designs that balanced cutting-edge performance with mental health safeguards. The intense neural synchronization required for these advanced flight systems posed risks of cognitive overload and emotional strain, challenges that conventional training had not anticipated. Through her input, new protocols emerged that incorporated adaptive AI assistance, biofeedback mechanisms, and tailored cognitive exercises. These innovations not only improved pilot performance, but also reduced attrition rates, validating the importance of a holistic approach to human-machine integration. Marin's work bridged the gap between science and spirit, forging pathways for technology to serve humanity without overshadowing it. Beyond the technical and operational spheres, Marin's story began to infiltrate broader conversations about identity, resilience, and inclusion. Though the classified nature of Project Altura meant that many details remained shrouded in secrecy, select narratives and testimonials found their way into confidential military symposiums and specialized publications. There, Marin shared her experiences of rejection, revelation, and ultimate vindication, not as mere anecdotes, but as frameworks for transforming institutional cultures. Her voice lent credibility and urgency to calls for reevaluating recruitment standards, dismantling bias, and creating supportive environments for those whose talents lay outside conventional metrics. In these forums, she was both advocate and exemplar, embodying the possibilities unlocked when systems adapt rather than exclude. The resonance of her journey also reached younger generations, albeit indirectly. In select educational programs affiliated with aerospace and defense sectors, carefully curated versions of Marin's story were presented to inspire students, especially those from underrepresented communities or with unconventional backgrounds. These narratives highlighted the value of perseverance, adaptability, and the courage to embrace one's unique path. Marin became a beacon for those who had faced barriers, a reminder that scars, visible or hidden, were not just marks of past pain, but also badges of survival and keys to unlocking future doors. Teachers and mentors reported renewed enthusiasm and confidence among students exposed to her story, an intangible yet powerful legacy that extended far beyond flight decks and control rooms. Within her own life, the evolution was profound yet subtle. The woman who had once been defined by exclusion now moved with quiet authority and confidence. She navigated the complex intersections of secrecy, leadership, and innovation with grace, balancing the demands of covert operations with moments of personal reflection. Her scar, once a source of vulnerability, had transformed into a symbol of empowerment, an emblem she carried with pride beneath her uniform. The invisible threads of connection it represented tied her not only to her father and Project Altura's legacy, but to a wider community of individuals bound by resilience and the pursuit of purpose. As Marin contemplated the future, she recognized that her journey was part of an ongoing narrative, one that would continue to evolve as technology advanced, as societies shifted, and as individuals like herself challenged boundaries. She envisioned a world where stories like hers were commonplace, where systems embraced diversity of experience and ability, and where scars, far from being hidden, were honored as the marks of strength and survival. This vision was neither naive nor utopian. It was a call to action grounded in lived experience and a belief in the transformative power of acceptance and innovation. Her legacy, she understood, was not confined to her own achievements or the missions she would undertake. It was a living, breathing force, a movement toward inclusion, resilience, and the celebration of human complexity. It was the ripple that spread outward from a scar, a code, and a single act of refusal transformed into determination. And in that ripple lay the potential to reshape not only aviation, but the very ways in which we understand identity, capability, and belonging. As dusk settled over the base, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Marin stood at the edge of the flight deck, gazing upward at the stars. The vastness above mirrored the limitless possibilities she now embraced. The scar on her collarbone felt warm beneath her fingertips, a silent reminder of all she had overcome and all she was yet to become. In that moment she smiled, knowing that her story was not just her own, but part of a greater legacy that would inspire generations to soar beyond limits and redefine what it meant to fly. As Marin's influence within Project Altura deepened, her role extended beyond that of a pilot or a covert operative. She became a symbol of transformation, a bridge between past limitations and future possibilities. The experiences she had endured, the rejection, the revelation, and the eventual recognition, imbued her with a unique insight into the ways institutions could both hinder and nurture potential. She dedicated herself not only to perfecting her skills, but to reshaping the culture that had once shut her out. The base, once a place of secrets and exclusion, began to resonate with new energy and hope, fostered by the seeds Marin helped plant. Her days were filled with intense training sessions, mission planning, and collaboration with teams across technological, psychological, and operational fields. She spearheaded initiatives aimed at integrating bioneural enhancements into pilot training programs, championing the idea that technology should augment, not overwhelm, the human spirit. Marin understood the delicate balance required. Advanced neural interfaces could elevate human capabilities to unprecedented heights, but they also posed risks of mental fatigue and identity dissociation, if not managed carefully. Her own journey had taught her the importance of maintaining a connection to self amid the flood of data and rapid decision-making inherent in high-stakes aerial missions. Marin's leadership extended to mentoring new recruits, particularly those who bore marks of difference or who had faced barriers similar to her own. She fostered a culture of openness and resilience, encouraging cadets to embrace their unique histories and scars as strengths rather than weaknesses. Her personal story became a cornerstone of this cultural shift, a living testimony that rejection was not a verdict, but a challenge to be overcome. Under her guidance, the program cultivated not just skilled pilots, but empowered individuals ready to navigate both the skies and the complexities of their own identities. Simultaneously, Marin maintained a delicate balance between the clandestine nature of her work and the external world's growing curiosity. Select glimpses of her story emerged in tightly controlled settings, classified conferences, strategic briefings, and confidential workshops, where she advocated for inclusivity, innovation, and ethical integration of emerging technologies. Her voice, calm and resolute, influenced policymakers and military strategists to reconsider outdated protocols and to invest in research that prioritized the well-being of operatives alongside mission success. These efforts slowly began to ripple through the defense community, inspiring changes that would have lasting effects beyond the walls of Project Altura. In quieter moments, Marin reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The scar on her collarbone, once a symbol of exclusion, now represented connection, a literal and figurative link to her past, her father's legacy, and the future she was helping shape. She often traced its contours, feeling the subtle hum of the nanosignal embedded beneath her skin, a constant reminder of the code that had unlocked doors she hadn't known existed. It was a mark that transcended pain, becoming a beacon of identity and purpose. Her story also became a catalyst for broader societal conversations about resilience, identity, and the power of acceptance. Though the full details of her work remained classified, carefully curated accounts inspired discussions in academic circles, leadership seminars, and mental health forums. Marin's narrative challenged prevailing notions about perfection and conformity, emphasizing that true strength often emerged from embracing imperfection and adversity. Her journey encouraged individuals across sectors to rethink how they assessed talent and potential, advocating for systems that valued diversity of experience and capacity for growth. Outside the confines of military and technological spheres, Marin's influence seeped into cultural dialogues about scars and stories, visible and invisible, that shape human experience. Her example underscored the idea that wounds need not be hidden or feared but honored as sources of insight and resilience. She became a quiet advocate for those who carried their own marks of survival, encouraging communities to cultivate empathy and to recognize the transformative power of shared narratives. In this way, her legacy transcended flight and mission, touching the very fabric of how individuals and societies understand identity and healing. As Project Altura evolved, so too did the technology and missions Marin undertook. She participated in flights that pushed the boundaries of speed and stealth, navigating environments dense with electronic warfare and unpredictable variables. Each mission tested her skills and her connection to the neural interfaces that now felt like extensions of her own body and mind. Through these challenges, she honed a unique form of mastery, not just over machines, but over the complex interplay of human intuition and artificial precision. Her performance became a benchmark for others, a standard of excellence that integrated heart, mind, and machine. Yet, despite the technical demands and high-stakes nature of her work, Marin remained deeply grounded. She maintained a commitment to the values that had carried her through rejection and self-doubt: integrity, courage, and compassion. These principles guided her decisions and interactions, shaping a leadership style that was both firm and empathetic. Colleagues respected her not only for her skills, but for her ability to inspire confidence and foster trust in the most challenging circumstances. The scar on her collarbone was a silent witness to this evolution, a symbol that had once triggered doubt and exclusion but now ignited connection and possibility. It served as a reminder that every barrier faced was also an opportunity to redefine limits and rewrite narratives. Marin's journey, from a dismissed cadet to a pivotal figure in one of the most advanced and secretive flight programs in the world, was a testament to the transformative power of resilience and the unyielding pursuit of purpose. As twilight descended over the base, casting long shadows across the runways and hangars, Marin stood poised to embark on another mission. The sky stretched endlessly above, a vast canvas of potential and challenge. Her thoughts were clear and steady, anchored by the knowledge that she was not just flying for herself, but carrying forward a legacy that would inspire those who followed. The journey was far from over, but with each flight, each decision, and each moment of courage, Marin was shaping a future where scars were keys, stories were strength, and limits were meant to be surpassed. Simultaneously, Marin maintained a delicate balance between the clandestine nature of her work and the external world's growing curiosity. Select glimpses of her story emerged in tightly controlled settings: classified conferences, strategic briefings, and confidential workshops, where she advocated for inclusivity, innovation, and ethical integration of emerging technologies. Her voice, calm and resolute, influenced policymakers and military strategists to reconsider outdated protocols and to invest in research that prioritized the well-being of operatives alongside mission success. These efforts slowly began to ripple through the defense community, inspiring changes that would have lasting effects beyond the walls of Project Altura. In quieter moments, Marin reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The scar on her collarbone, once a symbol of exclusion, now represented connection, a literal and figurative link to her past, her father's legacy, and the future she was helping shape. She often traced its contours, feeling the subtle hum of the nanosignal embedded beneath her skin, a constant reminder of the code that had unlocked doors she hadn't known existed. It was a mark that transcended pain, becoming a beacon of identity and purpose. Her story also became a catalyst for broader societal conversations about resilience, identity, and the power of acceptance. Though the full details of her work remained classified, carefully curated accounts inspired discussions in academic circles, leadership seminars, and mental health forums. Marin's narrative challenged prevailing notions about perfection and conformity, emphasizing that true strength often emerged from embracing imperfection and adversity. Her journey encouraged individuals across sectors to rethink how they assessed talent and potential, advocating for systems that valued diversity of experience and capacity for growth. Outside the confines of military and technological spheres, Marin's influence seeped into cultural dialogues about scars and stories, visible and invisible, that shape human experience. Her example underscored the idea that wounds need not be hidden or feared but honored as sources of insight and resilience. She became a quiet advocate for those who carried their own marks of survival, encouraging communities to cultivate empathy and to recognize the transformative power of shared narratives. In this way, her legacy transcended flight and mission, touching the very fabric of how individuals and societies understand identity and healing. As Project Altura evolved, so too did the technology and missions Marin undertook. She participated in flights that pushed the boundaries of speed and stealth, navigating environments dense with electronic warfare and unpredictable variables. Each mission tested her skills and her connection to the neural interfaces that now felt like extensions of her own body and mind. Through these challenges, she honed a unique form of mastery, not just over machines, but over the complex interplay of human intuition and artificial precision. Her performance became a benchmark for others, a standard of excellence that integrated heart, mind, and machine. Yet, despite the technical demands and high-stakes nature of her work, Marin remained deeply grounded. She maintained a commitment to the values that had carried her through rejection and self-doubt: integrity, courage, and compassion. These principles guided her decisions and interactions, shaping a leadership style that was both firm and empathetic. Colleagues respected her not only for her skills, but for her ability to inspire confidence and foster trust in the most challenging circumstances. The scar on her collarbone was a silent witness to this evolution, a symbol that had once triggered doubt and exclusion but now ignited connection and possibility. It served as a reminder that every barrier faced was also an opportunity to redefine limits and rewrite narratives. Marin's journey, from a dismissed cadet to a pivotal figure in one of the most advanced and secretive flight programs in the world, was a testament to the transformative power of resilience and the unyielding pursuit of purpose. As twilight descended over the base, casting long shadows across the runways and hangars, Marin stood poised to embark on another mission. The sky stretched endlessly above, a vast canvas of potential and challenge. Her thoughts were clear and steady, anchored by the knowledge that she was not just flying for herself, but carrying forward a legacy that would inspire those who followed. The journey was far from over, but with each flight, each decision, and each moment of courage, Marin was shaping a future where scars were keys, stories were strength, and limits were meant to be surpassed. Mayor. As Marin prepared for what would be one of her most critical missions yet, she felt the full weight of her journey settle into a steady resolve. The sky above stretched wide and unyielding, but beneath her flight suit, the familiar pulse of the neural implant whispered promises of synchronicity and strength. This mission was more than a test of skill or technology. It was a culmination of everything she had overcome and everything she had become. The rejection she had once endured because of her scar had transformed into the very source of her power, the key that opened hidden channels and secured alliances few even knew existed. Every challenge she had faced, every moment of doubt, had led to this point, and now she stood ready not only to fly, but to inspire a new era of possibility. The aircraft beneath her was a masterpiece of innovation, a seamless blend of human intuition and artificial intelligence, designed to operate in the most hostile environments with precision and agility. Its systems responded instantly to her neural commands, interpreting thought and emotion alike to adjust course, balance, and speed. As she took her seat in the cockpit, she could feel the harmony between pilot and machine settling into a rhythm, a dance that blurred the lines between biology and technology. The scar on her collarbone, a once ignored mark, now functioned as a living gateway, unlocking encrypted data streams and secure communication links that allowed her to navigate beyond conventional constraints. She was no longer just a pilot. She was a node in a network of hidden capabilities, a living embodiment of resilience and innovation. The mission briefing had been clear: infiltrate contested airspace, gather intelligence on emerging threats, and exfiltrate without detection. The stakes were high. Failure would not only jeopardize classified operations, but could destabilize alliances and compromise security on a global scale. Yet Marin faced these risks with calm determination. Her training, honed through countless simulations and real-world sorties, had prepared her for this moment. But more than technical prowess, it was the journey she had undertaken, the scars, the rejection, the ultimate recognition that gave her an unshakable core. She knew that her presence here was not an accident, but a fulfillment of a legacy that transcended individual ambition. As the aircraft lifted off into the early morning light, Marin's mind synchronized with the interface, her neural implant weaving her consciousness into the fabric of the machine. The sensors fed her a cascade of data, weather patterns, electronic signatures, radar echoes, and her instincts filtered them with razor-sharp clarity. Maneuvering through turbulent skies and electronic warfare zones, she pushed the aircraft to its limits, testing the boundaries of human and technological fusion. Every decision was a blend of calculated precision and intuitive response, a testament to the seamless integration that her scar had unlocked. In these moments, she felt the full magnitude of her transformation, from the girl once denied training because of a physical mark, to the pilot who commanded the skies through that very mark. Throughout the mission, Marin encountered challenges that tested not only her skills but her character. Unexpected electronic interference threatened to sever her secure channels, forcing her to rely on quick thinking and improvisation to maintain control. Navigational anomalies required her to recalibrate flight paths on the fly, balancing risk and reward with steady hands and clear focus. These trials underscored the complexities of the covert world she now inhabited, a realm where every flight carried hidden dangers and unspoken sacrifices. Yet through it all, her resolve remained unbroken. The scars that had once signaled vulnerability now symbolized strength, a tangible reminder that adversity could be transformed into power. Upon successful completion of the mission, the reception was not marked by fanfare or public acclaim, but by quiet acknowledgments within the secure halls of Project Altura. Colleagues and commanders recognized the significance of her achievement, not just as a tactical victory, but as a milestone in the ongoing evolution of human potential and technology. The encrypted channels that her scar had unlocked continued to serve as vital links in a network of trust and innovation, connecting operatives across continents and missions with unprecedented efficiency. Marin's role had become indispensable, her presence a testament to the enduring value of perseverance, adaptability, and courage.